It's time for the Bleed Lows Podcast with your hosts, Alonso and Juan, Alicia Del Valle, and the babyface gimmick in the sky, Roger.
Bienvenidos, señores y señores, to another episode of the Bleed Lows Podcast. This episode of the Bleed Lows Podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. So when the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here. And joining us on the Carne Asada is someone that I like to refer to as the Kershaw Whisperer. He is the senior writer of The Athletic and also the author of I say new book, but the book came out in May, so I know everybody's already read it, at least everybody that I've talked to. But the author of The Last of His Kind, Clayton Kershaw, and The Burden of Greatness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome first-timer to the show, Andy McCullough. Andy, ¿cómo estás, my friend?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, and I won't tell AJ Ellis that you gave me his nickname.
Well, look, I want to get into the book, but it just so happens that today Clayton Kershaw made his 2024 debut. But I will say this before we get into the book. I feel like you showed a sign of Clayton Kershaw in your book that I was actually kind of surprised and was not expecting that anyone would show. And maybe AJ Ellis knows that side of him, but I feel you're the one that pulled back the curtain. But we're going to get into the book, but did you get a chance to see Clayton Kershaw today?
Yeah. I left Los Angeles like 4 or 5 years ago, and I live in New York now, but I did watch the game on the television. And, I think that there was some really encouraging things with how he looked. If you're a Dodgers fan, I think, the stuff looked okay. Like the velo was there. The slider still has the sort of, movement you're looking for. The curveball looked great, and he was a little more reliant on the curveball. I think obviously the command was a bit off, and he was missing arm side a fair amount. And there was some hard contact, but, considering he hadn't pitched since last October and he's coming off major shoulder surgery, like I think it has to be considered a pretty successful outing, even if it was only 4 innings.
It's interesting to me, like the broadcast kept harping on the fact that it was like he's not taking this for granted. And there was the shot of his wife and his family in the stands, and you could see that Ellen was getting emotional. And I think it was a really stark reminder to everybody that this could be the last time we see this guy, because we don't know what's going to happen with him. When you were working with him on your book, was there that sense that he acknowledges the end is coming?
Well, yeah, I mean, and he's been fairly open about that for a few years now, right? Like ever since, I believe it was he first told, my friend Jorge Castillo, my former colleague at the Los Angeles Times, heading into the 2021 season, that he was basically like, hey, look, every year from now on, it's going to be here, Texas, or retiring. Basically, he was the one who kind of put that on the table. And then he realized, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have vocalized retiring. I don't want to talk about that just yet. Like, I don't want my career to be over just yet. But yeah, I mean, I think he's very aware of, the end being near. And I think it's something that, in the book, a lot of kind of the final pages of it are him sort of grappling with the decision of whether or not to come back, and it was kind of, it was something that he spent weeks sort of turning over in his mind, trying to figure out what he wanted to do and having conversations with, his wife, Ellen, and some other folks he trusted about whether or not he wanted to, put himself through the sort of like pain and stress and anxiety of another season. I think once he decided that he wanted to come back and that he wanted to get surgery and that he was going to miss, the majority of the 2024 season. I think it was very important for him to have, some sort of freedom, I guess, to pitch again next year. So like, I think if he makes it through this season healthy and has success, I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't come back next year, especially that's, why having the player option was very important to him. Because I think there is a part of him that very much wants to do one more full healthy season and see kind of what he could do.
Cody, come on in here.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of the things, especially in the book, and I, for one, had a chance to read it. Great read for any Dodger fan and Kershaw fan. I think the way you've peeled it back, like Juan was mentioning, and a lot of, especially when players start to get, to the twilight of their career, legacy becomes a big thing. So for people that didn't have the chance to read the book yet, or just are, taking their time with the book, how big of an impact is legacy for Kershaw? Because I know a lot of players don't want to get, too big of a head and talk about all their accolades, but, I think it does mean something, especially not only in baseball, but in sports. This is his debut today. This is his 17th big league season, all for the Los Angeles Dodgers. What does that mean for Kershaw, personally, and then also for the Dodgers themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that he, again, was like, in that last chapter, I don't want to keep like referencing it, but something he's grappling with, of what is important to him as he thinks about, kind of the final stages of his career. And there was a part of him, especially at the beginning of the winter, who was really interested in going to Texas, in part because he could be, at home with his family while he was rehabbing, and in part because he was considering, the merits of like, doing something different and breaking out of the routine that he'd been in for so many years. And, we talked about the idea of like, being a player who only played for one team, like Derek Jeter, for example. And, the way he framed it is like, if that's how it works out, I think that's great. I'm very lucky to be in that position, but also like, I don't want to do that just for the sake of saying that I did that. I want to do that because it's the right decision for myself and my family. And it ended up working out, with the Rangers decided to like not spend any money this winter. And there was, sort of issues in terms of like differing opinions about the medicals coming back, and the Dodgers, were always there as an option. And so it was like, it ended up working out great for both parties that it's like, oh yeah, you can just go back to the super team. We can get to how super they are right now, but you can go back to the super team that looks like a World Series favorite, with Shohei Ohtani and Tyler Glasnow and all these great players. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that like legacy is something that is clearly a part of his story, but I don't know if he spends too much time actively thinking about it per se. I think he's way more interested in, the chances to compete, the chance to win, and still being able to enjoy the actual act of, being a Major League Baseball player, I guess.
Yeah, and then you even mentioned enjoying it. Because I feel like, especially as you get older, no matter what profession you're in, I get it. He's playing the child's game when going into his mid to late 30s. But, this offseason was completely, foreign to him. An offseason shoulder surgery that he had to rehab all the way up until just now where he's making his debut. Given the way things ended last season, he could have just went up and retired off to the sunset. First bound Hall of Famer. But how big of an impact was that start against the D-backs, do you think, that made him want to come back and just kind of – because I've been saying, say if the Dodgers do accomplish their ultimate goal this year, he could just, his ultimate swan song, just ride off to the sunset, be the MLB version of Peyton Manning, win your championship, and then go home. How important was this just for him to like kind of mentally – because you bring up a lot of – the pain that a lot of Dodger fans, have lived through, especially myself watching, year after year, Kershaw's been through some highs, but we all know the October, failures, but coming into this season, how big was it for him to like, just come back?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the way last year ended definitely played a role. I asked him at one point, I was like, would you be okay if that was your last game? And he was like, yeah, I would be okay, but it doesn't have to be. Basically, like it wasn't something that was like, I can't allow this to happen. It was more like, I would really prefer that's not the last time I pitch. And he had the ability to, to get the surgery and to come back and to do it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, he talked about, and this is in the book as well. I mean, at the beginning of last season, he was like, look, if we win the World Series, I couldn't think of a better way, to say goodbye. Right. And I think, maybe if they win the World Series this year, which, they have a very decent chance of doing, maybe that's how it works out. I don't know I haven't talked to him like on an updated basis, like, hey, where in the power rankings are you in your retirement sort of scenarios? But yeah, I mean, I think that last season was very challenging for him, physically, mentally, emotionally. He went through a lot of different sort of things on and off the field that were very challenging. Being apart from his family was eating at him, I think, more than ever. His shoulder hurt every day, and like the mere act of playing catch was painful. And then, the act of pitching was, not just painful, but also just more difficult. His body was just not cooperating. And so I think, when he kind of took stock at the end of that season and felt like he still wanted to play, that for him kind of answered the question of like, do I still love this? Like, there was no way that he could still want to do that. He could be willing to subject himself to that sort of feeling if he wasn't still burning with this sort of, cliched desire to continue to play.
Yeah, and I think last question before I go back to Juan here. I think the title of your book speaks volumes right now, just because the burden of greatness. The Dodgers, they've been hit with the injury bug. Yamamoto's on the shelf, Buehler's working on things, Bobby Miller's still in the minor leagues, but they call on Kershaw yet again late into his career. I mean, he gives them a solid 4 innings today, but I feel like for the Dodgers to accomplish their ultimate goal, yet again, they're relying on a 36-year-old Clayton Kershaw. And I just feel like it's the same story. I know Juan and I have been very critical, saying, have Kershaw on the roster. Yes. Let him get into October, maybe get a start or two, but you can't have him be your like 1 or 2. I just don't think that's fair to him, especially where he's at in his first season, with a significant injury. Do you think that's just like kind of unfair to throw this all on him, or do you think he's ready?
I mean, look, he's a grown man. He gets paid to do this, like he's an adult. Like, no, I don't. I think last year was a bit different. I felt I've sort of talked about this. Like, I was aware of the severity of the injury, I think, and kind of wasn't able to write about it. And so that made it very challenging to try and navigate, like being like, dude, this guy's shoulder is like, he should not be pitching. And he's pitching game 1 of the postseason for a 100-win team. This is kind of crazy. But that, it was also like the doctors cleared him. So it wasn't like they were doing anything nefarious. It was just like he was dealing with a really significant shoulder problem. Anyway, all this is to say, I think if he's healthy and the stuff is there and the results are there, like, why can't he pitch game 1? Why can't he pitch game 2? Like, you just don't push him for 7 or 8 innings, right? Unless he's, getting the results to do that. Like, I think the thing that is so interesting about his, decline phase, the kind of post back injury phase. And I think Joe Davis mentioned this on the air today, but like in 2022 and 2023 combined, Kershaw has the lowest ERA in the sport. Like last year, when he was pitching in the second half with a wrecked shoulder, he had the lowest ERA except for every pitcher besides Blake Snell. And like, it's very challenging, I think, to, take the results and take the pedigree and take, what the Dodgers believe, who the person is, and be like, oh no, we can't subject him to the playoffs because he's had some, bad games there before. Like, he's also had a lot of really good games. And also, like, would you feel more comfortable with Bobby Miller in that spot? Would you feel more comfortable with, like, look, if it's healthy Walker Buehler, that's a huge difference. But this version of Walker Buehler, like, so I don't know. I think it's just a matter of they kind of need to figure out what they have both in their other options and in Kershaw over the next like 2 to 3 months.
Andy, you mentioned that last year was a very, very difficult, both on the field and off the field for Clayton Kershaw. And this is why I call you the Kershaw Whisperer. And I want to give you your flowers because not only as a writer, but as an interviewer, to get the subject to comment on on items that I don't think we would normally hear from him. But how strained was the relationship between him and the Dodgers last year?
I mean, I think that how do it's, sorry, my cat is being very challenging right now. The squirt bottle to try and keep him off the kitchen counter.
I don't think she'd like the question. Okay. I get it.
Harry, chill out, man. I'm trying to sell books. I think strained is like, because like on the one hand, it's very normal for players of his sort of stature and at their stage of their career to get to a point with an organization where they don't always see eye to eye on everything. Like, Derek Jeter near the end with the Yankees had, a lot of issues, for example. Like it's never nearly as smooth as, both the parties try and present it to the public. Right. And I think that's one thing that I tried to, sort of, foreground in the book, that there had been sort of these like little proxy battles, year after year on little things that started to sort of pile up and, that led him to the point where he was considering, potentially going elsewhere this offseason. I think the relationship with Dave Roberts has always been a bit of a challenge for both of them since the beginning. And I think, some of that comes from Kershaw's just sort of natural stubbornness and zeal for control. And I think that often sort of, bumps up against Roberts being, sort of maybe more like transparent about his injuries with the, the public and stuff like that. And I think, like I felt like there was an example last year that sort of explained like the disconnect between the two of how like they both are like kind of trying their best and just sort of like missing. And it was in like August and September when Kershaw was clearly, in physical decline and Roberts was open, basically like, look, it is what it is. Like he's grinding it out, we'll do what we got. And Kershaw went to him and was just like, Dave, tell them I suck. Like, don't tell them I'm hurt. Tell them I suck. They can't know that I'm hurt. And Roberts looked at it as like, well, I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to let people know that this is why you're pitching. He's like, don't do that. Like, don't protect me, And I think, and that's, a version of a battle that they've been having for, 7-8 years. And it's not like things that devolve into screaming matches or, real fights. It's like the natural sort of push-pull, within the, the sort of baseball environment. It's just heightened by the fact that it's like, the best, this generational talent and the manager of this massive franchise, and they're kind of having the same sort of, little struggle year after year after year.
No, I really enjoyed that part of the book, especially getting the behind the scenes of we knew what was happening regarding the LGBTQ night. And I feel like you did a really good job there of just showing how complicated Clayton Kershaw can be. We all know how strong his faith is at the same time. But when we hear stories of what a competitor he is on the field and how he can come off as being a red ass, I think it's hard for people to see those two aspects of a personality be in the same person. So I commend you on that. I think that's why, to me, I was not expecting that, because I always find that a subject is going to be guarded. So I'm curious, as you working with an athlete, do you ever, I know probably journalistic integrity doesn't want you to, but do you ever feel like maybe you need to protect the subject and be like, hey, are you sure you want to go there? Especially since you're writing it in a book.
Well, there's certain, there's sometimes, I think part of it is that we spent a good chunk of time together for the book, and some of it was like sort of more formal, like, hey, we're doing an interview. And then there's like, hey, we're sort of hanging out, and talking. And then there's sort of like, hey, we're catching up in the clubhouse, so and I always try and, you never want someone who you're writing about to be blindsided by, what you're writing about them, I guess. Like, you want them. And so there were times where I'd be like, I'm going to like write this, right? And he was like, yeah, that's fine. And I think, so yeah, protect him from himself. No, I think it's less about that and more about just you're trying to be fair to someone who, and I feel like I try and grant this to, even if I'm doing an 800-word story about someone, like, to, sort of like let them understand that, like, I'm not trying to trick them into saying something, that they, or, can, take what they're saying out of context, but just so they understand, like, this is like, I used to like always say this when I was a B writer, like, this is going to be in the newspaper tomorrow. Right. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. It's like, okay, that's fine. Like, cause I'm like, we have a tape recorder here and like, we're doing this. And so, with Kershaw, there were a few times where I'm like, I'm going to put that in the book. He's like, oh, no, that's off the record. And we're like, okay, well, let's get it. We got to, go through that. And so it's a fluid process that, I think is imperfect, but you just try and be as fair as you can. And like I said, like, it's a quote unquote unauthorized biography, right? Which like makes it seem like really scandalous, like what don't they want you to know? But that just means that like he cooperated for the book, but he doesn't have like approval. He didn't read it before publication. And based on what he's told me, he still hasn't read it. And so like, it's like, but so given that you just want to be sorry. So given all of that, he and Ellen were incredibly generous with their time, inviting me to their home, taking time to like, I talked to him when he was, driving to Ella Trosh's, office to do the surgery, like on the phone. Like he was very generous with his time. So you just want to be fair to someone when they are, being that open for a project like this. Sorry, that was a very long answer, but it's one of the more like interesting parts, I think, about doing this type of work, I guess.
No, and that's, and I appreciate your candor on that. The other thing that I appreciate about the fact is that you say this is a super team that's got some dents in it, holes, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Cody, I think you and I have been talking about that this whole time, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you mentioned it earlier in the episode where this team, the fans, they're very vocal, but there is an understanding that they are still, top in the National League, top record in the entire league, and in terms of betting odds, no matter who you're looking at, they're still like top 3. Some of them they're at 1, some of them they're at 2, some of them they're falling down a little bit with all the injuries. But obviously, with the trade deadline coming this Tuesday, there's going to be some mind-numbing trade talk. Mm-hmm. What do you think this team needs to add? Because everybody I talk to, whether they're a Dodger fan, someone that writes for a blog, or just in general, they all have a different answer. I'm curious to what you see with this team and what they should address.
Yeah, Randy Arozarena and Garrett Crochet.
Fast, you think so? That's a fast answer. I like that one. Yeah.
I mean, Arozarena to me, it's just like it's such a no-brainer that it almost like probably won't happen. But it's like he fits. I know he doesn't play center field, but like they could use an outfield bat. He's under team control for a couple years, and they have money. Red light player has always been really good in the postseason. Slumped the first 6 weeks, and then has been back to just kind of tearing the cover off the ball. Feels like he's a Tampa Bay Ray. Andrew Friedman and Eric Neander speak the same language, can make a trade probably fairly easily. The Rays are open for business, so I don't know if that's going to happen, but that is just like an obvious fit. And then, yeah, Crochet is I guess I don't believe Tarek Skubal is actually on the market. I think Detroit is just doing due diligence. I think it would be kind of bonkers for them to trade him given where they are in their like contending window. They're not nearly as far off as, a team in a non-American League Central division would be. And so then it's, Crochet is probably, is the best arm. And so the Dodgers should be hunting at the top of the market, and Friedman will probably be more aggressive than Mike Elias of the Orioles, even though the Orioles have a better farm system and could probably make better offers on stuff.
Yeah, and then it's interesting you bring up Crochet because right before we recorded this today, interesting comments coming out of Crochet's camp reportedly, where he's saying that when he's traded, unless he gets an extension upon that trade, he won't pitch him in October.
Mhm.
Do you buy any of that? Because I feel like everybody's kind of has a different opinion on that.
I think players have the right to try and protect themselves and protect their earning potential. And it's also the time of year when people, can kind of use leverage for certain things. And on the one hand, right, like that extension, given that he's basically saying, hey, I want an extension, and I'm not going to pitch in the postseason unless you give me an extension, it's probably going to be a team-friendly extension. So you can probably strike a deal that you feel okay about, right? He's basically saying, like, I want to be guaranteed that if I blow out tomorrow, like, I'm going to be, I don't read that as like, I want $200 million or I'm not pitching in the postseason, right? It's like, make me a fair offer and, we can do this. Part of me, and this is the very like hard ass part of me that is why I could never be a general manager. Is just be like, whatever, let's just go trade for Nathan Eovaldi. But the Rangers keep winning, and so they're probably just going to make a run at the AL West. But like, look, like I think players should make the decisions that they feel are best for their career. Crochet is in a really weird spot. He's like had a very strange career, drafted in 2020, as a starter, shotgunned into the big leagues as a reliever for a few years, dealt with some injuries, and now is like finally putting it all together, but is also, really going over his innings load and is understandably, doesn't want to, wreck his arm and cost himself. He's already like, the way he was sort of utilized and the weirdness of his career has probably already cost him some money. And so I think it's reasonable for him to be like, hey, like, this is my shot to, make sure my family is okay. I really want to maximize it.
And then you mentioned, obviously the Orioles, if you look at their farm system, best. They are completely loaded with, especially position pool. They can pretty much get any deal done that they want. But I brought this up, because I live on the East Coast around Baltimore, so there's a lot of Orioles fans over here. And even the fans, they're hesitant about going all in because they want to hold on to these prospects because their contention window just opened. And I kind of agree that the Orioles, while they can get a deal done, I feel like the Dodgers this year are going to be way more aggressive than they were in years past just because of what they did this offseason, the players they do have. Do you kind of get that sense as well? Because you kind of hinted at that the Dodgers would kind of overpay for a deal compared to the Orioles.
Yeah. I mean, I think they would pay. Yes. I think that while they have practiced a lot of discipline and, optionality and all that stuff over the years, this is the one time of year when Andrew Friedman gets a little reckless. When he gets, sorry, I'm still just like pointing this squirt bottle at this cat. This is the one time of year, where you can kind of be a bit reckless and not really get punished for it. And he also outside of, if they're listening, they're going to be furious if you bring this up. Outside of Yordan Alvarez, how many of these trades have they really regretted, right? When they got, Yu Darvish and Josh Reddick, that turned out to be a really good deal, or good deals for them. Or Yu Darvish, Rich Hill, and Josh Reddick, excuse me. The Machado deal, while Machado, obviously, we all kind of know how that went. That was a good trade for the Dodgers. You'd rather have Machado than Dean Kramer. And they got the Scherzer Turner deal is like sort of a all-time fleecing that isn't really well remembered because of, Scherzer overcooking his arm, but was like an incredible deal for the Dodgers. And so anyway, all this to say is like Friedman has proven that he can get it done this time of year. He tends to do pretty well. And I suspect that they will get better and probably get better in a significant way. The Orioles it's fascinating. They just have so much redundancy. Like they just drafted so many up the middle infielders who are all just like clubbing the ball in AA, AAA, or, on the major league roster. And so you go through, their prospect rankings, and you're like, all these guys are really good trade chips and there's nowhere for them to play in the majors. At the same time, like, they've gotten to this point by being really disciplined and not overpaying. And so most likely they will do stuff to get better. But if you're talking about like who's going to make a Godfather offer for Tarek Skubal, like I think it's more likely to be the Dodgers than the Orioles.
Nice. You want any questions on this deadline?
I not on the deadline because I know we're up against it, but I do want to get your opinion because you did give the man his credit, and I know every time I'm critical of him, everybody's just like, you're out of your mind, Juan. But the predicament that the Dodgers are in right now, can't you say that? I mean, or at least look at Andrew Friedman and be like, hey, you're the one who decided a week after spring training that Gavin Lux shouldn't play shortstop anymore. So you're going to put Mookie Betts there. You're the one who signed pitchers that have a history of injury. And for the second year in a row, you're running the bullpen into the ground. And now we're getting close to the postseason. But he's got a deal. He's got the ultimate job protection because of Ohtani's deal. Look, you mentioned a great friend of the Carne Asada, Jorge Castillo, who for me was the one who always asked the tough questions at the end of the year conference Andrew Friedman. Is Andrew Friedman above criticism, Andy?
No, of course not. No. That's not. See, like, you don't need to. It's not deifying Andrew Friedman to say that he's probably the best at this job, like, because he's probably the best at this job, but that also means he's a fallible man. Like he makes mistakes all the time, and sometimes he even admits them. I will say one thing, forgive me, because like I'm not like locked in on the details of this day to day, but like, is it fair to say that they decided Gavin Lux couldn't play shortstop, or didn't Lux stop throwing to base as well again, right? Like, didn't Lux kind of make that decision for them in some ways, right? Now you can argue, like, should they have stuck with this player for all these years, blah, blah, blah. But like, that was more of a, oh, holy shit, our shortstop has the yips again. What are we going to do? And Mookie Betts was like, I would love to be a shortstop. That sounds fun, So yes, they are in a predicament there. We will see how they sort of wriggle their way out of it. As for the rotation stuff, like, I think trading for Tyler Glasnow and extending him, to me, felt super aggressive. And then you watch him pitch and you look at him and you're like, this guy is awesome. Like, yeah, of course. And then now he's on, he came off the IL, and they really did believe that Glasnow had kind of turned a corner in recent years, and like the injury stuff had become more freakish and less like sort of systemic or whatever. So whatever. And to their credit, so far, he seemed like that's been about right. The Yamamoto deal, you're going to have a decade to wonder if it was good or not. Right. I think that obviously they were not the only team who valued him at that price point. I believe they matched the Mets offer to get it done. The Yankees were at $300 million or something like that. We're fairly close. And so I think the Phillies were at $300 million too. So like, it's not like they were really out on a limb with Yamamoto. The whole industry kind of got out on a limb with Yamamoto. And the reason had less to do with the ability and more to do with just the age. You just don't get 25-year-olds in free agency pitching anymore. But it's kind of gone the way that you would have been like, hey, the guy coming over, making all these adjustments, all of a sudden he's got a shoulder problem. Like, this is the definition of foreseeable. At the same time, they're in first place. They're going to win the division. I know they've played kind of worse baseball over the last, 3 weeks or so, but they've got a winning record, and every month they build this cushion, where they can kind of figure stuff out in July and August and September. And some years they're more prepared for the postseason than others. And so I think that, this is a long way of saying, like, oh, of course you can criticize, Friedman in the front office, like, of course. But I do think that there is also a reason why folks around, like, we did this thing for The Athletic at the start of the year, where we polled, like, it was 40 executives around the game, and we're basically like, who is the best front office? Give us your top 5 front office, right? And like, the Dodgers won running away, and that's basically a bet on Friedman essentially. And so, he's very good at this job, probably the best in the sport, and also should be like criticized and should be held accountable when things go sideways. Yeah.
Before I let you go, I can't let you go without asking, because we went all this long without talking about Ohtani. But being that you used to be the former beat writer of the Los Angeles Dodgers, congratulations on avoiding having to cover Ohtani every day. But I'm just curious if you see any of this. Like, he came here for a reason. He never experienced the playoffs with the Angels. The trade deadline is coming. He doesn't seem to have that kind of personality, but with the crazy year that's happened to them this year, is Ohtani the kind of person that's going to go in there and say, you guys better get us help now, because we have to win the championship. Everybody is saying, if you don't win the World Series, it's a lost year. And I don't know if Ohtani will receive that criticism, but does Ohtani strike you as the kind of player that would get involved, or is that just an NBA thing?
I have no idea, and anyone who tells you they know what Ohtani's thinking is overselling their information, I would say. I think that, again, like, I appreciate your kind words about not having to cover the sort of circus around him, but I did have to write about the Ippei Mizuhara scandal all of April, and I will never get those days back. That was some of the most stressful time in my career, is trying to cover that. I have no idea, and no one knows. No one really knows. Dylan Hernandez of the LA Times, my good friend and former colleague, would probably have a better read on that, in part because, he speaks Japanese and is able, to better parse sort of what Ohtani is saying. I don't, there's no evidence that he's the sort of player who would demand that they get better. And also, like, they're going to try and get better. Like, I don't think this is not like last year, where they're looking for floor raisers, or some of the years where they're like, this team is pretty much plug and play. Like, we're good to go. We can use a reliever. Like, they know what they need. They need a bat, in some form or fashion. And they need, at least 2 arms. Probably if they could get an elite reliever, they would like to do that too. That's always more challenging. But so yeah, if Ohtani, decides to go into Andrew Friedman's office and, say like, go get good players, they're probably like, yeah, sorry, I'm on the phone with Chris Getz. Like, I'm trying, So I don't know.
By the way, Dylan is a great friend of the Carne Asada. I asked him last Wednesday that question. He's still talking. So I don't have.
Trust me, he calls me. Because I'm on the East Coast now. He can call me early in the morning, so it's like 7:00 his time, and he just rants about his son's soccer team to me. I'm like, dude, I have stuff to do, and I never even played soccer. I don't understand what you're trying to explain to me. Anyway,
Andy, on the way out, just because you were here in Los Angeles for a while, and because we are live in the Carne Asada, we need to know what was your favorite taco in Los Angeles, and where would you go to get that taco?
I would go. So I live downtown. I live downtown, and then I lived in Echo Park. I liked Guisados. There's a place though. Hold on, I'm gonna look up. I know how to like drive to it, but I forget the actual name of it. So if you just give me a second, I'll look it up. It's like kind of near Dodger Stadium. Sorry, this is good pod. I know.
Was it in Atwater Village by any chance?
No, it was like right near the ballpark. What the heck? Where was it? I don't know. It's not I know that there's the Guisados near there. I'm sorry. I'm screwing this up, but I will remember it like in 10. I know how to drive. It's like you're driving down Sunset, and then you get on the other side of the freeway, and you make a left, and then it's there. It was very good. They had like good Vampiro tacos and things like that.
It wasn't Teddy's, was it?
No. I'm so mad.
What kind of protein? What is your protein of choice?
We usually get like like pork adobado,
Damn, Andy, with the adobado, I was not expecting that.
No, I'm just, I mean, I look obviously very white, but you know, like I eat a lot of food. I mean, I look very white because I am very white. Yeah, I would usually do pork. That's my general sort of taco choice. But I know it's clearly a taco friendly podcast, but I loved, the food in LA. I live in Manhattan now. And so like, I'm not struggling food wise. It's basically like choosing between, LA and New York. It's like the food is about equal. It's just, do you prefer like ubiquitous good tacos or ubiquitous good halal food? Right.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of, but it's like for everything else, it's like kind of a push. So anyway, those are thoughts for the day.
Hey, look, I was in New York last year. The Mexican food in New York has improved greatly.
Yeah. Where did you go?
And it's in Queens. Queens seems to be
Jackson Heights.
The mecca for Mexican food in New York. So I was very impressed. But
yeah, if you're ever in New York and you're going to Dodgers Mets, just get off the 7 train in like Elmhurst or Jackson Heights, and you can do a lot of damage eating.
Absolutely. Andy, we want to thank you. I know we held you over. You're so gracious with your time, but you are the senior writer for The Athletic and also the author of Clayton Kershaw, the Clayton Kershaw book that is the last of his kind, Clayton Kershaw and the Burden of Greatness. Andy, where can they buy the book and where can they follow you to get all the information?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter at by McCullough. I'm in The Athletic, fairly often. And then you can buy the book wherever books are sold, like if you want to support your local sort of independent bookstore, that's great. You can go to bookshop.org to do that. But, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, if Borders ever goes back in business, you can go to a Borders and buy it. Hopefully, hopefully they have it at LAX. I don't know. I haven't been to LAX in a few months. But yeah, just wherever. And if you want a signed book plate, send me an email, bymccullough@gmail.com. And, I'll mail one to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That's going to do it for this episode of the Bleed Lows podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. This episode has been brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. Nos vemos.